Hey guys, it's Drake, and I'm going to be talking about some of the new books that I bought in the last several weeks. And I had planned to make several other videos. I did make a couple, but I've just been so busy with schoolwork and stuff like that, where and just trying to read on my own and do my normal stuff, that I haven't had as much time as I would like to make videos. For I don't know, a little while I was able to make about a video a week, but it's been less common than that lately. So I think it might have to stay less common than a video a week for a little while, but we'll see. Whenever I have time on the weekends, I try to make something that you guys will enjoy and gives me an opportunity to talk about what I like. So anyway, with that being said, I'm going to be talking about some of the books I bought in the last couple weeks, 2-3 weeks, and give a little bit of an explanation why I bought it. And some of these I've read, some of the shorter ones. And anyway, so I had been reading T.S. Eliot again. I have a big edition of his work that is a hardcover by Johns Hopkins. It's over on this shelf right here. And I like that one. It has really good drafts of his works and things like that. But the thing is, it's like 1,000 pages. It's huge. It's not really easy to carry around. So I ended up going to the local bookstore that I usually don't go to too much. It's a new bookstore, so it only sells, books that are recently printed. But of course, you can find classics like T.S. Eliot there. Luckily, you can still find those. And so I wanted to look for just a selected poems is what I was looking for. And then mainly I wanted to have the Wasteland, Prufrock, that era of poetry, and then the Hollow Men. That's what I was going there for. So I did find an edition that had the Wasteland and Prufrock, this Penguin edition here. And so I was pleased to find that relatively cheap. The thing is, though, it doesn't have the Hollow Men in it. There wasn't an edition there that had those. They did have this cheaper, I think it was either Signet Classics or something like that. It was very cheaply printed, and I didn't really like it. Sometimes the ink rubs off on those. So I didn't get that one. I ended up going with this Penguin edition. And then I figured I could just, print out the Hollow Men or just memorize it or something. And so, I was pleased to have this. It has a nice Bruegel painting on the front, which is the Triumph of Death. And, this is the 100 years of the Wasteland being printed, 2022, from 1922. So just wanted to have an edition that would be really easy to carry around. So that's why I got that. While I was there, though, I also got one of his works that I hadn't read in completion before, because when I first tried to read it, I knew I was missing so much. It might have been 5-6 years ago, and that is his 4 quartets, T.S. Eliot's 4 quartets. So when I saw it there, I thought, well, I came here for T.S. Eliot, might as well get this also. And I've since read it twice. This is about the last week and a half or so. And I love it. I love it. This was the perfect time for me to read it. I'm glad I didn't read it earlier, and I'm glad I saved it for now, because I needed to read this now. With all the the strife in the world currently, T.S. Eliot wrote this at the start of World War II, and then as World War II is continuing, he was in London while the bombings were going on in London, just to give you a bit of a background of when it was written. And while we don't have something to that scale going on in the world, I do feel like all over the world we're entering a time of destabilization. Not to minimize the stuff going on between Ukraine and Russia right now, but that is definitely an extremely small scale compared to World War II. And if you just focus on that, that is ignoring a lot of problems going on in the world. Of course, you have what's going on in China. You have the extreme crime and difficulties in many Central African countries. You have the political destabilization in the United States, of course, where I am. And it just seems like a lot of things are coming to a head. And I don't like the way things are looking at all. And I really feel like T.S. Eliot was encountering those same things. I want to read a passage from East Coker, very start of East Coker. In my beginning is my end. In succession, houses rise and fall, crumble, are extended, are removed, destroyed, restored, or in their place is an open field, or a factory, or a bypass. Old stone to new building, old timber to new fires, old fires to ashes, and ashes to the earth, which is already flesh, fur, and feces. Bone of man and beast, cornstalk and leaf, houses live and die. There is a time for building, and a time for living, and for generation, and a time for the wind to break the loosened pane, and to shake the wainscot where the field mouse trots, and to shake the tattern arras woven with a silent motto. When I hear the word field mouse, I think of Postcards to a Volcano by Wallace Stevens, which is one of my favorites of his. And then going back to Burton Norton, the second part of Burton Norton. So that captures the in the beginning is my end. That idea of almost like, in the generation of something is the death is already present and implied. And I just thought of this anecdote about Kurt Gödel, where he was trying to become a citizen in the United States after fleeing the Nazis. And so he's in the United States, he's at the Institute for Advanced Study, Einstein's there, and he goes to the judge to pass his citizenship. And he starts to argue with the judge to try to tell the judge that there is a flaw in the United States Constitution where it is possible for a dictator to take power. And Einstein is there telling his friend to be quiet. This is not the right time for this sort of discussion. Just do what they tell you and just get it over with. And Gödel is trying to, implore this judge, look into this. There is a possibility of a dictator in the United States. You need to fix this so it doesn't happen as it happened in Germany. And, in that way, Gödel was able to see the inherent flaw in the design of the United States. And it's, completely obvious for anyone who looks in that way. And then the other main point that I took away from the four quartets, you can see already in the beginning, garlic and sapphires in the mud clot the bedded axle tree. The trilling wire in the blood sings below inveterate scars, appeasing long forgotten wars. The dance along the artery, the circulation of the lymph, are figured in the drift of stars. Ascend to summer in the tree, we move above the moving tree, in light upon the figured leaf, and here upon the sodden floor, below the boarhound and the boar, pursue their pattern as before, but reconciled among the stars. And that's another thing I've been thinking about so much lately. It relates to kind of complexity studies and general civilizational patterns, but it's the idea that the atom resembles the galaxy, and the circulation of the lymph is prefigured in the stars. That idea, seeing the small scale patterns, how they magnify into large scale events. And the sickness present interpersonally is also present societally. Just noticing patterns like that. Pattern is a very important word throughout the four quartets, but I don't want to focus on that too much because I want to make this kind of a quicker video. It's already 10 minutes. I failed already. But anyway, so we'll try to keep the next books to less than a minute each. At the same time I bought those, I also got An American Tragedy by Theodore Dreiser. I just love this cover. And Theodore Dreiser is now in the public domain, so this one was relatively cheap to buy as well. But I'm fascinated with Dreiser because he's from the Midwest. Most famous writers in American literary history are from either New York or California, East Coast or West Coast, but I'm always pleased to find a writer who is not from or living in the East or West Coast. So, Dreiser, this is a trilogy, book 1, 2, and 3, The American Tragedy. And yeah, I kind of was I'm not really a fan of naturalism or this, Emile Zola, Theodore Dreiser, Stephen Crane, this type of stuff. I'm not really a fan of this, 1880 to 1900 type of writing, but I'm trying to get more around to it because it's really influential, and you can see kind of echoes of it throughout even literature today. So anyway, that's kind of the reasoning I looked at that. Then I got kind of on a Russian kick, so I got Ivan Turgenev, Fathers and Sons. Part of the reason I got this is because Gaddis loved it so much, and I just haven't read it. I've read Dostoevsky, loved Dostoevsky for a while, but I just never read Turgenev, so I decided to go ahead and get this. And I was also interested in this partially because of the Russian nihilists and how they influenced, Nietzsche's criticisms of Western culture at his time and subsequent Bolshevik revolution with the Civil War and the USSR and Stalin, starting as a criminal and then ending up as a mass murderer. I just thought it would be so fascinating to see what Russia looked like before 1900 even. And I'm interested in Petersburg by Andrei Bely, which is around that time, 1900. And then I pretty much have a huge gap on what Russia was really like, because I've read Dostoevsky, Brothers Karamazov, The Idiot, Notes from Underground, which touch on it a little bit, but to me, Dostoevsky is more focused on like the characters and how they interact and how they symbolize philosophical ideas and personalities. But at least when I read it, I didn't get a really clear idea of what Russia was like. And of course, Russia's a huge country. I feel like I'd get a better idea if I read Dead Souls by Gogol, of course, who's earlier. But I thought that Fathers and Sons would give me a relatively clearer idea than Dostoevsky, but I haven't read it yet, so I can't say. But I also want to learn about the history of Russia at the time, like Alexander II and this sort of stuff. So I got The Shadow of the Winter Palace by Crankshaw, which is it's a historical work written by a journalist, but it goes from 1825 to 1917, and it tracks Russia's drift to revolution. It follows the different revolutionary periods and groups throughout Russia's history. What I'm most interested in is the period between 1850 to 1917. Because you have, Chernyavsky and, what's that guy's name? The guy that, Nechayev? Yeah, Nechayev, who is mentioned in, who is known to Dostoevsky. And then I'd also read about that time J.M. Coetzee's The Master of Petersburg, which does talk about these same, Russian anarchists and talks about them, which I really need to go back and read. Because when I read it, I was reading it because it had to do with Dostoevsky. But now that I'm interested in the Russian nihilists and how Russia was almost ahead of the rest of Europe in a way, because of course, Karl Marx and Engels were interested in these Russian nihilists as being materialists, non-religious, you know, reason as salvation kind of ideas were, you know, trying to get rid of the old structure and rebuild a new structure, and it ends up in, you know, almost, you know, just complete failure in the end with the USSR. But yeah, I'm just interested in learning about this period. I also want to learn about Russian imperialism and their expansion from, you know, 1600 to 1850 with Alaska, and how they treated the natives of Siberia. I have a couple books on that, but if you know an especially good book on that, I basically want to compare Russian expansion east to American expansion west, and really draw a strong comparison between the two. See how they're similar, see how they're different, and see how their differences played out in how the countries themselves were different throughout history, and then with the Cold War and so on. So anyway, if you have any recommendations there, let me know. I did also find at the same bookstore The Parisian by Isabella Hammad. And this is one book, every once in a while I look up literary prizes, and most of the time I'm horrified or disappointed by what I find. That's what is winning prizes. But with this one, I was actually impressed with the story. So just to read the back here, a masterful debut by Plimpton Prize winner Isabella Hammad. The Parisian leads us on an extraordinary journey through the life and romances of one young man from his studies in France during World War I to his return to Palestine at the dawn of its battle for independence. Rich and immersive, devastating in its power, whatever. So I was pretty fascinated with that idea because, you know, Paris in the early 20th century was a hub for non-Western intellectuals to visit and be educated. You know, you have like Mao Zedong, you have Japanese academics coming to Paris and in Germany a little bit, but you know, I thought it was fascinating to imagine a Palestinian coming to Paris and then going back and just seeing that perspective of the time period. And I'm aware that, you know, it's definitely going to be making a comment on like contemporary Israel-Palestine, but I hope it doesn't overdo that, because there's so much ideology in that, and I feel like that could really destroy a novel. But anyway, I'm really excited for this. Haven't read it yet, but I skimmed the writing, and the writing at least seems, you know, very solid and good debut novel. There's really nothing better than a good debut novel, so that's what I'm interested in. And then I believe I just have two more. So one that I did not get from that bookstore. I also didn't get Turgenev or the Shadow of the Winter Palace. I didn't get those from the bookstore, but and along with this one, I didn't. The Tales of Dionysus, the Dionysiaca, Dionysiaca by Nonus. So anyway, the longest epic poem from antiquity, which was written in the 400s AD by a person in Alexandria, Nonus of Panopolis. So stretching over 20,000 lines, written in the tradition of Homer, using Homer's verse, Homer's language, his narrative turns and motifs, and invoking his ancient muses, even though it comes over 1,000 years after Homer. So that's why I was interested in Nonus. But he was already published in the Loeb editions, which I could have got. You know, they're relatively expensive, but I could have bought those and read it there with literal translation with the Greek on the left. I don't know Greek, so that wouldn't have helped me too much. But the reason I got this book is because it's a fascinating translation. It's a group translation. So out of the 48 books of the Dionysiaca, that's how I'm going to say it, out of the 48 books, you have, I believe it was 12 translators that split up different parts. So you have some people you'll recognize. You have William Levitan, you might know him. You have Anne Carson, Frederick All, who does my favorite translation of the Aeneid. Let's see, who else? Those are definitely the biggest names. And then Stanley Lombardo does the last book. He's well known for his translations of various ancient texts. But anyway, yeah, and there are, I don't know, it looked like more than 12 to me when I was skimming the names, but at least 12 translators, and they each took a book. Some of them translated more than one book. But that's just a fascinating idea to me, group translations. I want to see how the writing style is maintained throughout. And how it differs purposefully and how it maybe differs on accident. And also just the longest epic poem of antiquity, written in 400 AD, whenever Christianity is completely sweeping through the Mediterranean. And you have, a poem, a pagan poem written at that time. It's just overall just an amazing, like just miracle that we have this book at all, that it survived, that it was translated by such impressive people, all these scholars, and that it was published in 2022, and that you can buy it for $39 from University of Michigan Press in America. That's like everything that happens in life is like 1 out of a trillion odds in one way or another, but this is 1 out of a trillion odds. So anyway, I'd recommend, check this out, Tales of Dionysius, University of Michigan Press. And then lastly, I have a book that I've been putting off getting and reading for years, literally years, but I finally decided to get, because I've been looking more into the fin de siècle, the end of the 1890s to 1910, that time frame, partially because of the technological transformation that the world went through at that point, but also the artistic shift from the Victorian, Dostoevsky, Trollope, Dickens world to the world of Andre Belly and Svetaeva and Joyce and Hart Crane and T.S. Eliot and Marianne Moore, etc. And one person who really straddles that line is Hugo von Hofmannsthal. And this is his edition of his Poems and Verse Plays, published by Princeton University Press, the Bollingen series. And the first book I ever read by Hofmannsthal was his NYRB puts out this edition of his short works, and it's mainly focused on the Lord Chandos letter, which he put out in 1901 originally. And that deals with the inadequacy of language to capture the philosophical crisis that Europe was finding itself in at the turn of the century. And then you later have, Wittgenstein, and then really, to me, it reaches its limit in James Joyce, limit in multiple senses of the word. And so the Lord Chandos letter, fascinating if you haven't read it yet. NYRB puts it out. It's 10, 15 pages, I think at most 15 pages. Definitely read that. The styling of that is that it's a young man writing to Francis Bacon back in the 1600s, and he's lost the ability to communicate in words. And he's writing this letter about how he's lost the ability to communicate. And I just think it's fascinating that he wrote that in 1901. Herman Broch talked about how it prefigures the unspeakable terror and horror of the 20th century, and in so many words, he says that makes him more poetic than Joyce. Herman Brook says this, so just fascinating. Herman Brook also wrote like a sociological analysis of Hofmannsthal and his age. But I was interested in him because he was like a poetic prodigy as well. He was writing poems when he's 16, 17 under a pseudonym, and he spread like wildfire. That was 1890, 1891 across Austria, and he became extremely popular. But then as time went on, he kept publishing, and he wrote librettos for Richard Strauss and so on. But I just wanted to read his poetry and his verse plays. I've been kind of interested in these turn of the century plays. I want to read Ibsen's The Emperor and the Emperor and the Galatian. What is it? The Emperor and the something. But it was one of the first mentions of the Third Reich. Not the Hitler Third Reich, but like the idea of a Third Reich. And it's Ibsen called it his masterpiece. And I'm interested in Ibsen, partially just in and of himself, Peer Gynt and Brand, but also because Joyce loved Ibsen so much, like really, really loved Ibsen deeply. So I want to read Ibsen a little bit to see what Joyce saw in him, and just that he's an interesting writer. But anyway, verse plays fascinate me also. So I was very pleased to find this edition of von Hofmannsthal's Poems and Verse Plays. It's a bilingual edition, nicely enough. Preface by T.S. Eliot. Introduction by Michael Hamburger, so that's always nice too. He does my favorite translations of Paul Celan. So that went doubly as long as I was hoping. So if you made it this far, hopefully you saw some interesting books that maybe you hadn't heard of or didn't know were out yet, or saw books you love and you can tell me about why you like them and why I should read them first. But anyway, yeah, thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll have more videos coming out. I'm planning on making a video on books I've read recently, which would be a more deep dive into the four quartets, The Great Gatsby, The Crucible, Brenner by Hermann Berger. Let's see what else. I think I'm missing one more in there, but anyway, I would want to make a video about that. I recently got my 1686 complete works of Thomas Browne, printed in 1686, rebacked, so it has a new spine on it, a new leather spine. I want to make a video on that, just talking about what books in that time were like. Their printing, their paper, their binding, just everything about that. Also talk about Thomas Browne. He's one of my absolute favorite writers, and really underappreciated in the sense that you can, most people don't know about him, even though it seems like everyone should know about him, or like should have known about him, with how many good writers and historians and literary critics know him and love him. Virginia Woolf coming to mind very strongly, Melville coming to mind, and yeah, a couple other videos. But anyway, hope you enjoyed, and death is a gang boss.